Amazing. Lizzie, welcome to the future of fashion business. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amazing. Let's see. Let's begin. Let's get you introduced to the audience. All right. Yeah, I mean, can you give us a very brief sort of like background introduction on who you are, what you do? And I always say this, feel free to brag as much as you want to in regards to your accomplishments, because people need to learn, people need to feel confident in terms of who they're going to be learning with. So feel free to brag.
I have about a decade's worth of wholesale experience across honestly all categories, men's, women's, designer, contemporary. I guess not as much mass market, but I think a specialty of mine has really been doing launches and relaunches of brands and helping position either totally new product or kind of revamped product within the market and making sure that that launch goes as smoothly as possible for the longevity of the brand. So interesting. I actually started out in retail, which is something that I would suggest anyone working with product should do, but especially in wholesale. Um, and then I kind of worked my way up. I started with really small brands. First of all, I started in fabric sales, which is another thing that is a really interesting process to understand if you're going to be working in product. Technically, it's sales, but again, it's also working with the creative team and kind of understanding their needs there. I was at Liberty London, which is, if not the oldest and best established print house in the world, it's, in the top
Top
two,
three
I
for
would
sure.
say.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
top,
Yeah.
yeah. I can't really, I think that there are mills that are better established, but not print houses. So I managed all of the J. Crew and Nike collaborations. Those are kind of the big ones that everyone's aware of, but just kind of working with design teams and understanding the commercial product process, starting with design was really helpful there. And then I moved on to a multi-brand showroom where I was kind of the incubator girl for emerging labels. And this was a long, long time ago. So I was launching brands mostly in the kind of advanced contemporary world, like a piece apart trademark, which is now no longer a brand, but was at the time like one of the big hot new things coming out of New York, by Pookie and Louisa Birch. It was absolutely fantastic. 11/6, which is a knitwear line that is still going today. It's really beautiful, kind of like mixture of hand produced and machine produced, all by artisans in Peru and Bolivia. Mostly female artisan collectives. It's now sold at Nordstrom, Saks, Shopbop, kind of all the big guys. And same with Alejandro Alonso Rojas, which was really beautiful brand by a Spanish designer based in New York, more designer price point there. So that, honestly, for those who aren't aware, a multi-brand showroom can be functionally a distributor, but if you're doing something like what I was doing with the emerging labels, you're really like a I almost kind of described it to my non-fashion friends as a talent agency. You sign these brands that you believe in, and then you help them build out the line. You help them, like, advise them on everything from press to pricing to like imagery needed. And then you just make sure the right eyes get on the product and that, when it delivers to stores, that it sells. So multi-brand is fantastic. Um, but then I went from there to the exact opposite. I went to Alexander McQueen under Kering Group, where I managed the contemporary business. When I started, it was called McQ, and then we rebranded while I was there, and it was called MCQ. That was pretty wild. I was really the only person working on that brand in the Americas. I managed US, Canada, Mexico, and everyone else there was working on mainline Alexander McQueen. I reported to the president there, and then I was the only one in anything contemporary. Um, that was honestly a very interesting experience as well. First of all, working under a big brand, there are codes for everything, how everything should be done from a communications perspective, from, merchandising, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, it was a really rapidly changing landscape for the brand. So when I started, it was your traditional diffusion label, taking codes of the House of McQueen, bringing it to a contemporary price point. When I started, it was 70% women's business with all of the US majors, Saks, Neiman's, Bloomingdale's, etc. And we had a small men's business that by the time I left had, it was like absolutely on fire. We were a top 5 brand with all of the US majors. And the men's business like far eclipsed the women's by the time I left. And then not only, was there that massive change, but also we scrapped the McHugh brand and restarted it as MCQ at a higher price point. We took back our whole strategy on distribution, launched exclusively with like super top tier, kind of more streetwear retailers. Super wild change in terms of like having started understanding that it was a women's advanced contemporary brand and then moving into something very kind of like communications based, very drop based, with a totally different type of retailer that we were targeting. And then since then, I've been more in women's, but across both designer and contemporary. I went to La Pointe for a little bit, fantastic New York-based label that still produces in New York. It's super celebrity driven. Like they just did an incredible custom Beyonce outfit for her Renaissance tour. They dressed Jill Biden for it was one of the major White House events. So like, literally dressing every powerful woman in at least US media, but also elsewhere. And that was a brand where I grew a ton of wholesale business that was honestly, I think, largely driven by press. So that was really interesting to see, how a brand that's driven by celebrity works. And then I went to the exact opposite. I was at Saint Cassette managing their international sales. And Saint Cassette's amazing. They were founded by Jane Siskin, who is famously one of the co-founders of Seven for All Mankind. And then she co-founded Elizabeth and James with the Olsen twins. And then when the twins wanted to change the direction on that, she took her team and started Saint Cassette only about 7 years ago. And now they're a top 3 brand at all US department stores. And only honestly, while I was there, did they kind of build up the communication sector. So that was a brand that was really driven by, kind of wholesale placements.
Also merchandising.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah. So
wow.
Lots and lots of different experiences in there.
No, that's great. Because I think that when it comes to, I think this applies to almost every single discipline, but sales specifically, having a very broad understanding of how it works in different contexts with different strategies is essential to sort of understand what specifically is going to be best from each brand, because it hits close to home because I do something very similar as my main business. So we do distribution in the Japanese market specifically, and is all that you just said. So I guess that the question that I want to ask you after everything that you've said is, how would you really define sales? What's your own personal definition of what selling fashion actually is and what it means? Is it connecting with buyers? Is it connecting with consumers? Is it having just identifying good products? Are you more a salesperson or are you more a curator, right? So what is your own definition that you've sort of created over such a broad experience?
I have my strengths. I consider myself a product person and a people person. But at the same time, sales is whatever the brand needs to get over the finish line. So it just totally depends, and you have to be ready to do whatever's needed. So I've worked at companies with incredible merchandising teams where, you're really given everything on a silver platter and also given very clear instructions on how they want you to sell the collection, what penetration of core product you should be selling versus what penetration of seasonal product. But then again, I've worked at companies with no merchandising, and I need to be, getting into the nitty gritty of the numbers to see what is overperforming and what is not pulling its own weight, and where the holes are, like not just from like having spoken to buyers and saying like, okay, everyone wants item tops right now, can we make more item tops, but also like, okay, we only made one item top, but it made up like 16% of our sales, so clearly this is a category we need to expand on. So it's really just whatever the needs are. Like in sales, you're married to your number, so whatever you can do to get there, dependent, like regardless of what tools you were given by the rest of the company. Sometimes it's just one designer, and you need to be like right before market helping sew the labels onto the garments. You just, whatever is needed, you got to do. That's it. So there's
Awesome.
no one answer to that.
Yeah, so it's identifying what is the goal and what is the best way to get to that goal is essentially the role of a great salesperson.
Yes. And being ready to jump in anywhere,
Yeah.
like no task is too small, no mountain is too high or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. And what is your take on this big question? Because sales obviously is required for, cash flow.
Right.
And is one of the driven forces of any brand, no matter what stage they're in terms of size. But there is this misconception that everything starts with sales, especially entrepreneurs or founders or people that are very product driven, think that sales is sort of like this magical formula that somehow you're just going to hire a salesperson and sales are going to start jumping in, right? Which sometimes is the case, right?
Sure.
But do you think that good sales starts with good product and infrastructure? Or do you think that a good salesperson can make almost any product and any brand work?
Well, you said infrastructure, and I think that that's the most important thing. Um, like
Because you
in
hear it all the
wholesale,
time, right? Like
yeah,
an underperforming salesperson is going to say, "Oh, the product or the brand, it's the product of the brand," right? But is it
right.
actually? And that's what I'm trying to ask you. What is your personal belief on that?
I mean, I've definitely successfully sold some bad product in my experience. That happens. Everyone should be prepared for that. The dream is selling great product. So yeah, product is important, but like it's not everything. But you said infrastructure earlier, and that to me is it's like truly the most important thing, because like salespeople are gold on what is, or bonused, just in sales, your success is based on what was invoiced, not what was booked. So I can go and sell things really well at wholesale upfront in market. But then let's say we don't meet our deadline to ship the product. We lose that sale. So like
Plus the
everyone
reputation.
else,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But I mean, this is like a very normal thing. It's not like, you have to really consistently be shipping things out of the delivery window to lose your reputation. But like if honestly, my boss at McQueen said this every day, and I will say it every day for the rest of my life. Mediocre product shipped early is always better than good product shipped late. And that's not something that salespeople are in control of. But, just in terms of like, if we are working on, a classic seasonal structure where it marks down at a certain point, having 10 weeks selling, on average 3% of a product is so much better than having 2 weeks selling, 9% of a product before it marks down. Like it just, the math works that way.
Hmm.
So there are certain things that like massively impact your sales performance that have nothing to do with product and have nothing to do with sales. And
Mm-hmm.
it's
Of
all about how the company works seamlessly behind the scenes.
course. Yeah, and the role of a salesperson is almost to identify which brands have the most sales potential by looking at all those different factors, right? Which one have great brand positioning, product, infrastructure. You can make a lot of things work based on your skills, right? But
Mhm.
ideally, you want all of them because if you have
Right.
all of them and
Of course.
you have a great salesperson, that's when you get incredible results. And because salespeople, and I think this is very educational because most people listening are potentially aspiring entrepreneurs, is that salespeople are incentive based, right? And if you
Yeah.
want good performance, you need to give them all of the right tools that they need to perform, right?
Yeah.
And it's all those different factors that you just mentioned. It's not just, oh, this salesperson's ability or contact network is what am I responsible also as a founder, right? To make those things a possibility.
Yeah. And there have been so many times in my career, when we'll really get behind something. Like there was a new pant that we were so excited about at one of my brands. And then when it shipped, the fit didn't work, and it's really hard to sell a pant that doesn't fit. It looked amazing in pictures, it looked amazing on the models, but like there were moments when maybe the fit team should have done something different. And that's a huge loss because that was an opportunity for an evergreen product that we would never mark down. It would always sell at full margin, which and like salespeople are gold based on their sales. Buyers are gold based on their margins. So if you're helping them with a good margin, you're helping yourself get more business. So, something like that, where it's like, really meticulous product stuff. Yeah, that should be absolute top of mind.
Amazing. And transitioning, now let's say that a brand already has the infrastructure, to make
Mhm.
solid sales seasons. What is the first thing that you look at? What is the first sort of like stage of your decision making process? Because again, every brand's different. Uh, Product, seasons, positioning, everything sort of like influences the strategy differently. So, what are the first questions that come to your head in terms of, okay, this is a good brand. Now, this is going to be potentially the best strategy for this brand specifically?
So something I actually haven't touched on yet, outside of my like full-time corporate work is that I do a lot of small brand consulting, you know, for all sorts of brands. And I think the number one thing that I've never passed over is like determining what the hero product is. I think there's so many brands, for some brands, it's better to focus really small, stay direct to consumer, or maybe focus on, editor placement and getting really good press and celebrity stuff, like, getting the visuals look amazing. There's so many different ways to approach that are very, very brand dependent. I think the number one thing though that, can make or break a brand is having hero product. Um, it's very hard to be a brand that can offer a very wide assortment. Um, and even the brands that do that still have the hero product that pays for everything else,
Carrying the
essentially.
whole collection. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So and and it's important to specify that we're like a hero product is different from like an it item because like everyone right now is so concerned about how fast the trend cycle is moving. So I personally would only almost like advise the brands that I work with to avoid trying to have an it moment because just as quickly as it, brings you up, it can also kind of like suppress you once people are past that moment. Like it's almost like you can get burned and it can feel passe. Um, but the difference between like an it thing and a hero thing is that it actually like despite how fast trends are moving right now, it takes a very long time for the average customer to get tired of seeing one item. So, like, unless it's like the most wild thing that's absolutely everywhere, or something that's like super out there that doesn't really have a lot of like longevity in the customer's actual life, you can really like keep on doing the same thing for years and years and years. before the customer will get fatigued of it.
Sure. And could you give us sort of like the consistencies of what make up a hero product and maybe a specific example? Is it
Yeah,
high
of
profit
course.
margins? Is it easy to produce? Is it logistical simplicity?
No, so when I say hero product, I mean that it has to be the hero product for the customer. So this is like an end customer thing where everyone is going to want it. Like people are going to buy it in multiple colors. They're going to buy it year over year. I mean, this is really a core conversation. So like a lot of brands are hesitant about building out a core program because it feels harder for them almost than establishing seasonal collections. But um just in terms of brand messaging alone, if you're trying to start a new brand, if you're trying to gain customer following, you got to show them the same thing a million times for them to know who you are. So like part of it is just like, so we're talking about when I was at McQueen, that big sole sneaker, a lot of people call it the Larry sneaker, that was the number one SKU at Nordstrom while I was there for a while. Um,
Wow.
and that shoe was around for and like, honestly, forgive me if I'm quoting that wrong, but I'm pretty positive that that is the correct. It was probably like the number one SKU in Nordstrom in designer or in footwear. I don't remember what all of the qualifiers are, but still, that is huge. And the thing is that shoe had been around for a really long time before I started, and
Yeah.
it's still around. So it's like it wasn't an it item, it was the hero item that literally paid everyone's bills. And like no one can expect to have an item that successful,
Right.
but it is
Everybody should
something
aspire. Everybody should aspire to have a
everyone should
product that's
aspire.
successful. Not everybody should expect to have a product that's successful.
Yeah. So like obviously you can't necessarily choose what your hero item is going to be. You have to see what the reception is,
Hmm.
but like you should probably go into things thinking like, okay, I'm going to give a distilled enough like assortment of the brand that if something has the potential, it will be accessible enough, like enough people will have chosen it that it can take off.
Right.
So I mean, there's so many reasons to do this. Like one is obviously the brand messaging, where like the reason why half of the people heard about McQueen and rap songs was because of that sneaker. Like that's free marketing
Mm.
everywhere. Like every designer shoe floor you go to has that sneaker in 10 colors on a huge display. More free marketing. Not to mention the millions of dollars it brought in. And the fact that no development really has to go into something like that once you've done it. So
Of
you
course.
develop it once, and then after that is free money.
Yeah.
So like in terms of like cutting down your development costs. And then also once you're doing big enough numbers in something, the margins there should pay for you to experiment in other ways.
Of course.
So like
Interesting.
that's like my number one thing where like I've had a couple conversations where people say that they're not sure about making a core program. And I think that
It's
that's like the
I
number
agree.
one thing that
I agree. I think it's the only thing people should be sort of like focusing on at the very beginning because getting that right is going to carry the entire business for a long time. Yeah. Wow.
exactly.
Interesting. So you've identified a brand that has a hero product. If they don't, they should work on developing one. You
Yeah.
identify a hero product by essentially looking at the sales and seeing, okay, what is from a customer's perception of the brand, what is the product that they associate with the brand that is easy to replicate? And from there is, I'm guessing, what is the strategy? How can we grow this more? How can we sell this specific product more? How can what's the next step in your sort of like decision making process? Do you then go into, okay, now how do we formulate an expansion strategy regionally or internationally for this? What's the next step for you?
I mean, it so depends because some people will get a hero product on D2C. Like I'm thinking of, for example, Frankie Shop, like currently such a hot name in fashion, but they've also been around for a long time. And um, I think that for a while they were just making the product for their own brick and mortar store, or I think at that point they probably had two. Now they have Lord knows how many, like at least five, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but they have two in New York and at least one in Paris. And so at first, the thing that I saw as their hero product was an oversized t-shirt with shoulder pads in it. So super flattering, like a little bit more impactful. And then I remember that they launched wholesale with Browns based on that. And they did like a 3 SKU package that was just based around this. There was like a shorter version, a longer version, and then a couple color multipliers, and that was it. So it really depends if you have an existing wholesale business or if you're all D2C. But yeah, sure. Expansion is the name of the game. It's like if you are in a couple doors, but you have something that you know is working with a US major, then yeah, of course, expand the doors and make sure that they get that, like the new ones get that hero product first, and then just like a couple seasonal things for spice. That's kind of what you always do. I don't know, I'm totally rambling, but
No, no,
uh
no, no, not at all.
it's just, again, everything is so brand specific. Like when I was at La Pointe, we were selling, the brand kind of catchphrase is like monochrome power dressing. We were like at the frontier of the like feather trend. So we were like, okay, feather pants are our number one most searched thing on Google. Like, yes, sure, maybe that sounds like an it item, but once you do it for a few years and it's still trending, like that's your core item, that's your hero piece. But maybe not everyone in the world needs a feather pant. And maybe you do have to keep it elite because you are making them for close to $2,000 and it is a luxury item. So it's like not everything needs to be blasted out at a big scale. But at that point, maybe the answer is like, okay, we made this thing that people are responding to, and now we need to get Beyonce to wear it. Like it just depends if your answer is volume or if your answer is, kind of like the highest quality brand support
Hmm.
with something like, major placement like that.
Yeah. And as you said, it really all comes down to the brand's positioning and the brand's goals at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what type of brands do you see surfacing more today? Not 5 years ago, not 10. Is it mostly D2C brands, a specific price points that we can maybe give some general piece of advice to?
Let's see. So when I was thinking about this concept of the hero product, I thought of these brands that I don't necessarily think even make sense in the fashion space. They're kind of more the like VC backed startup-y brands that are exclusively hero products. So like in a way, or like a Rothy's, something like that, where it's literally like they're just going to make the suitcase or the packable ballet flat and that is it. Um, so I do think that especially as finance gets more interested in fashion, I think a way to get really big is to kind of take that approach where you're just like, I'm just going to do one thing and I'm going to get it well funded. And we're not going to try to reinvent the wheel right now. We're just like doing that one thing. Like I have no, like, how much must Crocs be worth right now? Just like, so there are a lot of things like that I think we've seen more in the past 20 years than, before in the obviously now like centuries of selling apparel and non-apparel
Yeah.
things at retail.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, contemporary or designer luxury brands can learn to, again, focus a lot of their energy, focus on resources on those hero products. And then again, just creating collections to spice things up, and stand out in the marketplace from a positioning perspective. But again, what you are positioned as a brand and what product makes you the most money are sometimes very different things.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and that's actually honestly like often a struggle internally in brands. Just like how much do we want to communicate on this thing that's making us money, and how much do we want to communicate our vision. And you don't necessarily have to choose between the two. You just need to have the capacity to do both.
Yeah. Or
I
or
do.
great decision making, the discipline to sort of like balance both things at the same time.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is like once you have something that is so out there on the market, you don't even need to like market it anymore. And all of your brand communications can be towards things that maybe feel a little bit more emotional to you and like more core to the ethos of the brand. So like eventually you can kind of branch off.
Amazing. And hypothetically speaking, again, a lot of ifs and buts and relative to a lot of different things. But once you've had all of those things, right, and you're analyzing a brand, let's say it's one in the similar position, I'm guessing it might be strong from a D2C perspective, but it's interested in expanding wholesale, right, or wholesale channels. What would be the next thing? Do you think having a regional approach to expansion is also the way to go? Again, following the same focus and following the same focus not only on the product and how you're communicating it, but also in the types of markets that you're expanding into and the type of sales strategies that you're doing, like focusing only on D2C or focusing only on wholesale in the US. What would be the next or like best thing? And again,
Yeah,
this is very generally speaking, of course, because I mean, people need to understand that everything depends a lot on each brand and their situation. But overall, what do you think is a better philosophy to have when it comes to expansion?
absolutely wholesale. I think that it's extremely hard to get big enough to justify having channels in multiple places. Like, either having, like particularly targeted regional online strategies versus, or, like opening up your own retail stores in different cities. I think that's a question for a particularly well-established brand. The wholesale is the absolute way in my experience to expand.
Of
And
course,
it's only after you kind of get to like beta test your brand in different markets via wholesale that you then should really have an idea of like how much demand there is there. And like obviously, yes, if you have like a great D2C business and you're seeing that like this one city is ordering all of your stuff, like maybe sure, maybe go do a pop up there or something. But like that still is, the
super
amount of
risky.
demand you would have to
Yeah.
justify that is something you're probably not going to see as a very small brand.
Yeah, of course. And I would say this in this way. I mean, wholesale tends to be lower risk or lower reward. DTC tends to be higher risk, higher reward. I think, as you said, in very, very specific scenarios, D2C might be the way to go. But in general, for a brand that has, their hero product has the infrastructure and are looking to actually start focusing more on expansion, it really has to be wholesale. I mean, it's because it is marketing, right? Even if it's not making a lot
Right.
of profit, you're marketing, you're validating the markets. And again, you're getting the data and the confidence that you need in order to start making those, D2C sales channel expansion decisions.
And not to mention it's like, when you're producing for almost any type of product, the higher the volume, the better price you're going to get. So like it's just so important to be able to hit those numbers, and you're not going to do it on your own unless you get really big first. So that's where you need the wholesale partners coming in and giving you like 10, 15, 50 units, to help back your SKU, and that helps you get to where you need to be.
Interesting. And when it comes to wholesale, do you think it's also important to be market specific and take it on the market to market step by step basis? Or do you think having an international approach is sort of like the best way to go?
So having just come from an internationally focused role, it's much less fruitful. Like you can really get there, but I think that there are so many risks that like truly, I was working for a top 3 US brand. I would send about 300 cold emails before I would get one response because you don't know what's going on. You don't know if, their Google Translate is translating to their local language correctly. You don't know if they have any idea who the brand is, even though we're huge in the US. So that's definitely, I would definitely say international is for maybe a little later on. That said, if you can get a key, especially like in my career, it's always been get a key UK partner. That's like the number one thing. It's like if you can get in with the Harrods, the Selfridges, Net-a-Porter obviously is UK based, but so global. If you can get one of those, that's a major, major stepping stone. But the other thing that I will say about those partners in particular is that they know how important they are for the brands, and partnering with them is not low risk, no, low reward, because their terms are typically very predatory. This is where
They
you're
have
going to,
all the negotiation leverage.
yeah, this is where you're going to see the Barney's issue,
Yeah.
where like Barney's single-handedly put a handful of designers out of business. And not just when Barney's closed. It wasn't like Barney's declared bankruptcy and like all of their outstanding bills were awash and designers, couldn't afford to move forward because they lost all that money. It was even before then, so many of those really top tier accounts demand free shipping, and then, either sell through agreements or consignment that, eat away often your entire profit margin. And then, maybe they also need co-op marketing and all of these things that, like there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that go into wholesale, where so many brands are essentially paying to be in their best placements.
Mm.
And like, obviously, yes, of course, everyone sees that as a marketing investment, but truly it can overextend many brands. So
Mm.
that's the one thing that's the one real risk of wholesale.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's also one of the biggest benefits of focusing on markets is at the end of the day, I mean, wholesalers, we're in this weird position, or fashion designers has always been in this weird position where they're enslaved to their wholesale accounts, right? But in reality, they need to understand that everybody is enslaved to the end consumer, right?
Exactly.
The wholesale accounts are enslaved to whatever people want to buy. So if as a brand, you're more in touch with that, and you can only do that if you're very focused on which market you're selling into, then the good wholesale partnerships will happen as proxy of you understanding that and basing your designs, your infrastructure on and your positioning on who the end consumer is versus, oh, what do I need to do to get into Barney's or Selfridges or, Harrods or whatever. And that's where
Yeah.
smaller brands can have the genuine leverage of, what we can be in the store, but because the end consumer actually wants us, not because, the store wants us just for branding or positioning or whatever reason they want to just, stock us in.
Yeah. And so this is another thing that brands of all sizes should be able to do, but we haven't touched on yet, is the importance of like follow through on your sale. So it's not just what you sell to the buyer and then you trust that the buyer understands what's going on at the retail level, because they have so many brands and you only have one or two or three or five, maybe if you're at a multi-brand showroom. And so you need to be able to go to your shop floors and talk to the associates and talk directly to the customers. And so when the buyer comes in and says, I don't know, we're not doing so well with like, we're not seeing crop pants right now. You know, you can say, yeah, totally. I've been selling this one instead at like literally when I go to your shop floor, which is like, I don't think people realize so often that wholesale people actually spend a good amount of time selling directly to clients, but they do. And so it's like the more knowledge you have of what the end consumer is telling you, the more you can influence what goes on. And like buyers will appreciate it because they don't have time. Like they're not going to go and sit on the shop floor and sell this like one brand that might not be
Course, it's
super
your
important.
brand, it's your responsibility, right? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's crazy because even the when you speak from a wholesale perspective about clients, oh, who are your clients, you're automatically thinking, oh, you must mean the retailers that I'm working with, right? When in reality, a client is a person that buys your clothing. So why not
Right.
spend your time understanding the actual client instead of a bridge, which is essentially what retailers are. They're bridges between brands and the actual end consumer. Spend time, understand what's going on, and then base your decisions based on that. And again, it goes back to what you were saying about the importance of focusing on markets. If you're trying to do this 10 different places in the world where you can actually physically be looking at things, having these conversations, it's essentially impossible for you to really have a genuine level of understanding of who your customer is, what they want, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Exactly. And you can also like, if you're doing the wholesale model, in New York, everyone who works in wholesale who sells to the New York department stores will go to the department stores. Like usually it's like every Friday morning you do the rounds and you fix up the shop floor. Like obviously bigger brands will have retail coordinators who do that. And it's like typically more of an entry level job. A lot of interns will do that. But at the same time, like literally, you will have like the VPs and directors going
Yep.
too, and just making sure that they still have the finger on the pulse
Yep.
everywhere. Like, obviously, like in New York, it's very accessible for people who are based here and who do this, but you can't always do that elsewhere. You obviously want to have a good like text relationship with everyone who's on the floor selling your stuff. You want to you want to be like every salesperson's best friend. And that obviously goes way beyond product. And then honestly, if you're a small brand and you're trying to get like a local following, I can't speak more highly of trunk shows.
Hmm.
Like even if you have a wholesale relationship that isn't necessarily like where let's say that there's a store that you have a relationship with, but they're not ready to invest super heavily in your brand. You can still go there and co-host an event with them and meet their customers, and they get a cut of the sales. But that's like a really good low risk way of doing kind of like a hybrid wholesale model without, you know, like you get to take advantage of their space
Mm-hmm.
and their customer base without fully just like throwing like all the visibility into the wind.
Of course.
So
So
like, yeah,
collaborating with retailers. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but that's something that I always suggest for small brands who are like, okay, they're responsive, but they're not yet investing in me. What can I do? And it's like, well, you just got to go there. You got to have an event, and like if it's successful, they will want to buy. But then at the same time, maybe you won over some of their local clients who will then become direct clients.
Amazing. And what about developing partnerships with agencies, external agents, distributors? What's your general philosophy on that? Because it also is, there's always two schools of thought, right? There's either the try to do as much as in-house as you can, and then there's try to outsource as much as you can. So what school of thought are you and why?
Um, again, it just so depends on the size of the business and the type of the business. I would say the more boutique and luxury you are, the more you should try to keep it all in house, because it's going to be about, maintaining your exact brand vision. And like when we were relaunching MCQ, there was a big conversation always about like we hold it as close as we can to our chest, and then there is a moment when you have to kind of let it go. And with something that's like a little bit pricier, yeah, you hold it closer to your chest a lot longer. You want to make sure that it lands correctly, that it's, that everything about it is perfect. Whereas if you're doing something a little bit easier, yeah, like get regional people everywhere. If you're making flip-flops for $50, you know, get a distributor in every market and it'll be like pretty easy. It just totally depends.
Interesting. Wow. And when it comes to, do you think it really varies on the sum? Is it mostly depending on the brand's positioning? So if it's luxury versus contemporary versus designer, or does it also depend a lot on the size of companies? Because obviously, and this is more speaking for smaller brands, because smaller brands, of course, understand the importance of keeping things close to heart, of course. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that need partners also the most, because their time and resources are very limited. So what is your personal philosophy on that? Do you think it's also size dependent, or is it mostly just
Yeah.
positioning?
I mean, it's all of the above. I've never had trouble convincing a designer to hold things close to heart, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
It's always the opposite.
It's the opposite, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so the flip-flop example, like I I have friend I've never worked a ton with distributors or local agents. Like obviously I have been at multi-brand showrooms, but that's slightly different. At least with the caliber of brand I was working with. But I know friends who have agents, and there's always a little bit of like a, you know what, like maybe not every account is perfect, but it's still like, like net positive. So I think it's just whether or not you're willing to let the situation be a net positive, or if you really need every single detail to be perfect. So it also depends on like what kind of leader you are. Um, it's obviously like, yeah, yeah. I think that there are also like not every region has a distributor that can sell every type of product.
Of
So
course.
it definitely obviously becomes a more appealing proposition for more mass market brands. Like,
Of course.
so yeah, I think the type of product and the type of brand is going to more inherently lead itself, lead its way into like very, very curated versus very like accessible
Hmm.
points of distribution. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
there's
No,
no catch-all answer is what I'm
of
saying.
course. No, of course. And this is why sales is so fascinating. Well, I find it quite fascinating. Maybe entrepreneurs and designers find it quite tedious, is because there
Right.
really is no answer to the question, right? It really is all about trying to understand the brand and the current situation and the leaders and the team involved, and then crafting what you believe is going to be the best strategy based on those different factors, and then analyzing the strategy and probably realizing that you got it wrong, because it's going to happen, and then trying to learn and iterate as quickly as possible, repeating the process.
Yeah. And the other thing that like perhaps need not be said, but also is maybe worth saying in if you're not always talking about wholesale, is like, as I said, the number is so important. Like you really marry yourself to that number. And there's just a lot of situations where like maybe there are ways where like not everyone needs to know how the sausage gets made, and I think that that's really what can happen with local agents and distributors. And um I think the number one thing is like where you're willing to make those sacrifices, where something might not be the ideal partnership, but it helps you a little bit. And it's just every brand is different. They need to decide where they're willing to make sacrifices on like vision versus money.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's not going too far in any of those two directions. I think where the sort of like balance lies, because there will be right partners for specific periods of time for your brand's growth, for specific sort of like positioning strategies. It really is also relative. That I think that as long as you're testing things out and you understand who you are as a leader and who you are as a brand, and you never compromise those very important things, for at the same time willing to test out things and learn, you'll eventually start building also a process that sort of like works for you. Because even from a sales perspective, if you know who you are as a brand and you start going out there and you start implementing everything that you're saying, slowly the right partners, the right channels, the right strategies will sort of like organically happen as a result of that. As we were saying at the very beginning, just infrastructure from a product perspective, but also you'll start developing sales infrastructure, you start developing branding infrastructure, and all those different things that will continuously make those decisions easier and better over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has also been like my big career catchphrase is like commercial is not a dirty word. So like, obviously working in luxury, working in even advanced contemporary, there's always the fear of brand dilution. And as I said earlier, like the customer's capacity to see something before they get tired of it is stratospheric. Like you really have to bombard someone with one item before they get tired of it. And if you have the chance to do that, congratulations, that's amazing to like even have that much of someone's attention. And so the thing is like if it's selling, it's probably good. And that's the thing, it's like that I think people sometimes forget that like the customer isn't that dumb. They're buying things that work for them. And if they work for them, then that means that they're working in general. And so like it's okay to let a lot of people buy it then.
Yeah. Yeah, this happens a lot, especially with, highly creative focused founders, I find, which again, it's not wrong, right? It's kind of like that's why it's such an interesting relationship, because the commercial aspect of brand building is what gives the foundations that are required to create incredible creative propositions in the future, right?
Yeah.
And I think people get confused on the order. Some people manage to do it because they had incredible creative proposition at the very beginning. Some others managed to do it because they had incredible commercial propositions at the very beginning. But they are both equally as important. It's just a matter of understanding how the dynamic between those two things interplay.
Yeah, I think just the important thing is to like not like attach a moral value to one versus the other.
Yeah.
Especially because it's so hard to have a profitable fashion company. Like that's the number one thing. Like you can see a huge company that's been around for a very long time, and when you get in the back and like see the inner workings, a lot of places are not profitable that you would expect to be. Um, so it's really just like do what you need to do to become profitable if you need to at the end of the day make money.
Yeah.
So like ideally, yes, everyone should be, Dries Van Noten with like one of the most incredible fashion brains of all time. But like there's no shame in, being that person, then also making something really easy that everyone buys season over season.
Of course. Yeah. Wow. So identifying the sort of like golden products, so you called it, that was the first thing, hero products, then crafting a growth strategy based on that. Wholesale is something that is definitely recommended. It's just a matter of understanding what the best strategy is going to be for you. And then, as you said, marrying your numbers and understanding what you're going for. So, and that third step of the conversation, can you explain a little bit more about what that means for you? And how do you personally approach projections and goal setting?
Yeah. So sorry, first I want to backtrack a little bit because something like, yes, I suggest wholesale to everyone. But something that I've dealt with a lot with the smaller designers and smaller brands that I work with is that they don't plan for wholesale from the beginning. And that I think is the biggest mistake that you can make, because assuming you're doing all of your pricing for direct to consumer, you don't have the margin to then add in wholesale. So if you get to the point where you're like, okay, to scale the way I want, I need wholesale now, you're presumably going to then have to go back to the drawing board on your pricing, which would then risk you losing your direct to consumer audience that you have. And so then you're taking a risk on something new and untested, which is wholesale, and also taking a risk on the one thing that you have that's tried and true. So the number one thing I say is start your brand positioning from the get-go, allowing yourself to factor in wholesale margins.
Of course. Yeah, because if you're profitable on wholesale, you'll definitely be profitable on D2C. But if you're profitable on direct consumer, you won't necessarily be profitable on wholesale.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you're not necessarily going to be able, like, even if buyers are clamoring to get your product. If your pricing doesn't match their expectation, they literally won't be able to buy it.
Of course.
So
Interesting. Wow, great. And then
yeah,
transitioning into
and then, yeah.
the numbers. What's your mindset behind that?
Oh my God, I've been asked this so many times. It's a mixture of feeling and Excel. You know, you're like, I just feel like I could be here. And then you also then have to think of, okay, who, like, I feel like I could be here. And then you look at it from a really pessimistic perspective. And then you kind of map it out there. Honestly, I go line by line, account by account. It's like if you're projecting for Bloomingdale's, but your number 3 door is going under construction, like what percentage of the business is that door? Will they be carrying it at all? Will they be moving that stock to another door that's untested? And so you have to get like really, really in the weeds. And then, presumably you're at a company, which you always are, that has super, super aggressive growth expectations. So then you have to get super hyped up and super excited and give yourself your best case scenario numbers, still going door by door, you know, line by line, just like, okay, who is doing really well? And like, let's say like Scottsdale, Arizona is
Hmm.
doing, this is becoming one of the top retail markets in the country. Like everyone from LA is moving there. They have major like professional sports training grounds there and stuff. So it's like for certain amounts of time, entire like industries just move there. And there's a huge influx of money. So it's like, okay, maybe for my spring season or whenever it is that said team is practicing there, like, okay, they're going to be spending more. And so, you do all of this that's like, and, but then you still like put it into a formula where you're like, okay, like, let's say we think that that one location will get 25% growth. And then you just like plug in your formula. And so it's just a mixture of like feeling and then numbers.
Right.
And then you just have to balance out your like good feelings versus your bad feelings and
Of
kind of,
course, and previous performance also helps a lot, right? Because
yeah, yeah. Oh no, of
you can
course, of
use
course.
yeah, yeah, you can use because I understand exactly what you mean. It's also very similar to the way that we sort of like approach things. And yes, it's you use previous evidence and data to give you specific benchmarks, and then sort of like intuition handles the rest. But intuition is made up of a almost, because I've thought about it a lot, right? Because that what is that intuition, where does that really come from? And it's a mixture of understanding the brand, its positioning, its competitors, the current market, um that will lead you to sort of like an intuitive decision of, oh, maybe it will be this much or maybe it will be that much, which will therefore be, and again, all with data as sort of like a specific benchmark. Because and again, this is, I asked this question specifically because I think, and I understand why people ask this a lot. It's the one question that everybody wants to know, but it's the one question where nobody really can ever know exactly what the answer is going to be. You can have
Right,
educated
of course.
guesses, right? The more experienced you are, the more educated your guess will be. But it's still that. It's just a guess.
It's 100% a guess. And then the one other thing, again, there's a lot of guesswork that goes into this, but the one other thing is the merchandising aspect of forecasting, where it's like, okay, like we had an amazing year last year for sundresses. How's our sundress offering looking? And then honestly, I suggest every brand go back and look at like what are our top 5 styles and then say like what is the anniversary style for this? Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. Like trends will change, but and like yes, sometimes it's faster than others, but you know, you're not going to get the same results every time if you're not speaking to the consumer need. So like you can go pretty granular on that regionally and say like, like for example, sales within the US. Like we have so many climates in the US. So it's like you got to make sure that your south is covered just as much as your north, if not more, probably more. And so like, yeah, you can project your numbers, but then you also have to be able to back it up with product. And that's where you got to be able to, if you don't have a merchandising team, you got to be the merchandising team, or you have to go and talk to the merchandising team and make sure that they're seeing the same things you are from a numbers perspective with regards to what exact product that translates into.
And wow, amazing. Great. Well, I think it's been a pretty specific sort of like conversation around the process. I think a lot of people are going to be feel very overwhelmed, but that's, I mean, I
Okay.
guess that's normal, right? Because I think that when people think about sales, they automatic instead of thinking about these things, their first line of thought is, who am I going to hire to do this for me, right? Who am I going to
Yeah.
partner up to do this for me? But in reality, if you want to, especially when you're early on, you do need to have a grasp and understanding of these things because they are a very important part of the business. And if you don't, you know, um, but yeah, I guess the next question that I want to ask you would be based on the conversation that we've had so far. What do you think are the most important three things, once again, that people should need to remember after listening to this episode?
I think that essentially sales is a catch-all term for whatever gets you over the finish line, and so it's about having the tools necessary and then also having the closer. So it's not one or the other. um the number one thing, obviously, you got to have the product that is worth you developing it, so the hero product that can live on. You got to have some way to get brand visibility to the end consumer, be probably wholesale. That's honestly the easiest way, but also great marketing is good. And you got to make a product that delivers, like not just like, is the design worth living on, but like get your logistics in place and like get the quality right.
Amazing. And transitioning to the last question, what would be the best piece that you'd give yourself as a salesperson earlier on in your career?
Oh, I don't know, because I didn't go to fashion school, and I think a lot of people did that go into sales. I think it's like a very, like a lot of like FIT girls and Parsons girls end up actually working in wholesale. Um, hmm. Yeah, I I think that having taken more interest in the business side of things earlier on, instead of just like it's the same as retail and I'm selling product to people, which is something I knew how to do in my sleep, that I think was the biggest hurdle, like talking business.
And what advice would you give you in order to learn that language? Would it be to be a little bit more curious? Would it be to start having different conversations? Would it be to go into fashion school? I don't know. What specifically would you say, like, you know what? You need to understand the importance of this, and this is what I think you should do.
No, I think I don't think I needed to go to fashion school, and I'm glad that I didn't. But I do think that there should be more kind of crash courses in
Hmm.
how to speak fashion business early on in these roles. Especially because sales assistant roles are typically very, very numbers driven. And you kind of like work the back end before you move up to the front end of something that's a little bit more customer facing. I don't know. I don't know if I'm actually giving you anything to work with here with this answer. But I think it's just like, like there's so many people in fashion who are kind of sheepishly asking each other how to calculate margins and stuff, and like all of these, there are a lot of like very sales specific terms that are almost kind of like gatekeepy, where it's like you need to be able to know how to calculate this thing, or like negotiate this other thing. And I think that, yeah, if I had just gotten someone to sit me down really early and tell me all of the terminology so I didn't have to learn it from real life, that would have been better.
Mm. Yeah, it's almost like finance, where fashion has this external line of almost language and vocabulary that they
Yeah.
use to keep
Yeah.
people from joining the club.
Completely. Completely. So like, yeah, I think there are some tricky math things that you do in wholesale that, a lot of the time they kind of like leave to the big guns. And I think that that should just be part of training. I think like asking for like a business acumen training is part of my you know, like I should be learning to steam samples and calculate sell-through agreements at the same time.
Amazing. And when it comes to making all these decisions, once you start learning, what do you think is more important? Do you think rationality and logic is more important when it comes to sales? Or do you think that intuition is more? I mean, ideally, is both, right? But if you have to pick one over the other, which one would you pick?
Intuition. I know maybe one person in sales who relies entirely on rationality and logic, and she's incredible. But every time I see people who are not her leaning too heavily on it, there is that element of the unknown that creeps up. And like the whole thing is that, the global market is changing at all times. Global trends are changing. And it's just that like once you've been around the block a few times, you do kind of know what product's good. And you're allowed to just listen to that and say, like, no, guys, everyone should buy this one,
Of
you
course.
know?
Yeah, intuition through experience.
Yeah, intuition through experience, I think that's the one that I think is more applicable.
Hmm.
Like people can do that and like you can start trusting your gut once you have a good amount of experience.
Yeah.
But like the people who only go based on, kind of like case studies and numbers, like you got to be really, really good for that to work out for you long term.
Right. And it takes a very specific type of individual that usually you do not find in fashion.
And or that you don't find in sales, you find it in
Yeah.
buying.
Of course, you find in buy. Oh yeah, yeah.
All of like the person who's able to do that is typically not in sales,
Hmm.
is the answer. So there's
Interesting.
nothing wrong with that method. It's just that
Different
um
skill sets and different strengths.
yeah,
As you were
skill
saying at the
preference
very
and
beginning. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't have that experience and you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your brand, you either have two choices. You either work with somebody with the experience, or you get that experience yourself by creating or, you know, creating as much mistakes as you can, as fast as you can, with as little repercussion as you can.
Yeah. And
Because
the
it's
other
funny,
thing,
right? You can't just, I mean, it's ironic, right? Because we're doing a podcast on this, but you can't listen to a podcast and learn this. You can
no,
listen to the podcast and develop the right expectation, right? But that intuition will not come if you don't go out there and try to sell stuff and mess up and try again.
honestly though, I think the one thing I would want from people listening to this podcast is for them to learn all of the sales terms that are only used in sales.
Hmm.
Um, because yeah, you're totally right. They are used as a barrier. And like speaking the language is so much of it. And it's not that hard once you know what it is. And it's just not really out there for people to learn. So that's the number one thing I would say. Like if you're trying to do it all yourself, like learn those terms, learn what it all means. Because that's like half the battle, honestly, just speaking the
Yeah.
language.
Amazing. Wow, Lizzie. Great comment. I think a lot of people are going to really appreciate it. It's going to be I think a good introductory episode to this part of the industry, which is something very, very important. So, thank you for the time. Again, thank you for the flexibility. And I really enjoyed the conversation myself. So I'm pretty confident people out there will enjoy it as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hope I didn't get too in the weeds with it, but it's hard not to because it's such an all-encompassing thing.
Of course. No. I think people want it. If people want to learn, they'll listen to it.
Awesome.